Some of history's most incredible discoveries were staring experts in the face for decades, from cave paintings too detailed to be believed, to footprints 900,000 years old that vanished with the tide, and forgotten palaces hidden under buildings. These are discoveries experts missed for years until someone looked closer. The Altamira cave paintings were discovered in 1879 by Marcelino Sanz de Satola in Spain. They were incredible, almost too incredible. I'll explain what I mean in a sec, but the ceiling was covered with big full-color bison, some over 6 feet tall. The artists even used the bumps and curves in the rock to make the animals look almost three-dimensional, with shoulders and rib cages that make them look almost lifelike. Of course, he had to show all the experts and academics what he'd found. I mean, this was incredible. And they didn't believe him. Even looking at the paintings with their own eyes, they didn't believe it. It just looked too sophisticated. At the time, most archaeologists thought people in the Paleolithic era were primitive. Tools, sure. Fire, maybe. Realistic art with depth and perspective. That just didn't fit their idea about what humans were like back then. So instead of checking the paint, the soot from torches, or the layers of calcite on the ceiling, a lot of scholars just assumed Satola had hired a modern artist to fake it all. Some even accused him of fraud in public. No one bothered with serious testing because their minds were already made up. It wasn't until decades later, when similar cave paintings were found in France, that researchers finally looked at Altamira again and finally accepted that it was genuine ancient cave art. When Sutton Hoo, an Anglo-Saxon cemetery in Suffolk, England, was excavated in 1939, it was clear right away the burial was elite. Gold belt buckles, weapons, and imported silverware made that obvious, but one of the most famous artifacts, a warrior's helmet, didn't come out looking like a helmet at all. There were hundreds of rusted iron fragments scattered in the soil, and at first no one knew exactly what they were. Historians didn't think Anglo-Saxon England actually produced elaborate helmets like the ones described in old legends like Beowulf. Those stories were exaggerations, so they figured these fragments were just random debris. Nobody thought to try fitting them together. It took years before researchers started cleaning the pieces and experimenting with how they fit. But then, slowly, they started noticing cheek guards, a nose piece, eye holes. This was a helmet. And not a crude one either. This was some intricate metalwork, a symbol of status, power, and craftsmanship. Once the pieces were assembled, it was clear what they were looking at. The fragments had been there the whole time, but nobody had ever thought to piece it all together. In 2013, storms along the Norfolk coast in England stripped away sand, exposing a dark patch of sediment. At first glance, it looked like mud. There were no bones or tools that would make anyone think the area needed to be excavated, but when a few researchers started noticing repeating impressions in the ground, heel marks, arches, toe marks, it was clear there was something more going on. They immediately started measuring and photographing because the tide was coming in and the prints wouldn't last long. By the next tide, the footprints were gone, but dating later showed they were between 850,000 and 950,000 years old, making them the oldest known human footprints outside of Africa. The tracks showed several people walking together, including at least one child. And the only reason we know about them is because someone happened to spot them at exactly the right time. Unfortunately, today, all we have are photos, measurements, and casts. The prints themselves gone. Terra, Amata, which means beloved land, sits on the slopes of Mount Boron in Nice, France, about 85 feet above the Mediterranean. It was discovered in 1966 during construction of a terrace, and archaeologist Henry de Lumley got permission to dig. From January through July, his team worked non-stop, 7 days a week, even round the clock at the end, to excavate the site. And what they found was incredible. The site was dated to around 380,000 BCE. According to de Lumley, there was evidence of huts made by early humans. Each hut seemed to have a fireplace in the center, one of the earliest signs of controlled fire in Europe. They also noticed low walls of stones and pebbles positioned to protect the flames from the strong winds. The huts were probably made from animal skins stretched over poles. They hole in the center to let smoke out. De Lumley thought they could fit 20 to 40 people inside, a surprisingly organized social life for humans that long ago. There were also tools made from beach stones, including picks and stone scrapers. Now, that said, not everyone agrees with de Lumley. Later archaeologist Paul Avila argued that the stones could have shifted over time due to natural causes, streams, the soil movement, or wind. That would mean the patterns de Lumley saw might not represent actual huts or shelters. Avila also pointed out that the objects from different time periods had likely mixed together in the layers, making it hard to say exactly when anything was placed there. Because of that, she believed the site might be younger than de Lumley thought, closer to 230,000 BCE instead of 380,000 BCE. Lascaux wasn't discovered by archaeologists. Its entrance had collapsed and blended into the hillside, so people living nearby had no idea it was there for a very long time. But in 1940, 4 teenagers were following their dog and ended up crawling into a hole. Inside, they found a huge cave full of paintings. There were bulls, horses, deer, plenty of more abstract symbols. Thousands of these paintings covered the walls and ceilings, and some of them were very high up in the walls, which means the artists must have built scaffolding to reach them. Later, they were dated to be about 17,000 years old. After it was discovered, the cave quickly became a tourist attraction. People came from all over to see it, but it actually caused a problem. Just breathing in the cave changed the moisture and carbon dioxide levels, which started actually damaging the paintings. So eventually the cave had to be closed to protect the art. Today, visitors can only see replicas, while the originals stay preserved underground. At Vindolanda, a Roman fort near Hadrian's Wall in England, archaeologists led by Robin Burley were digging in March of 1973 when they found layers of mud and soil that looked ordinary at first, but then they dug up these thin wooden tablets covered in writing, and what these tablets revealed was pretty astonishing. Archaeologists hadn't noticed the tablets at first because they didn't think to look for fragile wooden artifacts, stone inscription, pottery shards. That was the usual finds. But once someone examined the mud carefully, the writing became legible with gentle cleaning and infrared imaging, and they turned out to be everyday letters, notes, and lists written by soldiers and their families around 100 CE. Some were love letters, invitations to parties, shopping lists, all this everyday, ordinary stuff that would have seemed so mundane to the people writing them back then, but seeing stuff like this nearly 2,000 years later, I mean, that's almost more exciting than reading more official military type records or something like that. It just reminds us that these were everyday people who were more like us than we often imagine. The Rosetta Stone was discovered in 1799 by a soldier working near the town of Rashid, also called Rosetta. It was just lying there, carved with a decree in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs. They recognized Greek immediately, but nobody could read the Egyptian scripts, so for years the stone was admired more as a curiosity than anything else. The reason it took so long to make sense of it wasn't because the stone was hidden, it was on display in public. The problem was that scholars didn't know where to start with it. Hieroglyphs had been mysterious for centuries, and most assumed that they'd just never be deciphered. It wasn't until Jean-Francois Champion in 1822 took the time to compare the scripts carefully that the breakthrough finally came. Using the Greek portion as a guide, he realized the hieroglyphs were an actual language. They weren't just decorative. That unlocked the ability to read ancient Egyptian writing for the first time. And so, this stone had been sitting in plain sight the whole time, and it instantly became one of the most important keys to understanding Egyptian history. Similarly, the Dead Sea Scrolls weren't exactly hidden. Some pieces sat in plain sight for decades without anyone realizing how important they really were. When they were first found in the late 40s near Qumran, the big scrolls in the caves got most of the attention, but over the years, tiny fragments ended up in museums and private collections. They were just scraps of parchment after all, some only a few inches long, so most people assumed they were unimportant. When scholars started looking at these overlooked pieces more carefully, the story started to change. They realized the fragments included sections from almost every book of the Hebrew Bible, along with other religious texts. Suddenly, what had been ignored became essential to understanding Judaism and early Christianity. Some fragments filled gaps in known texts, others showed variants that nobody had seen before. Collyweston Palace in England had basically been forgotten for hundreds of years. Most of it wasn't above ground. The walls were buried or they were built into other buildings, so it was almost impossible to see what had been there before. Then around 2018, historians started taking a closer look. They compared old sketches and documents from the 16th and 17th centuries to see what was actually on the ground. At first, nothing really made sense. Some walls looked like random rubble, decorative features were thought to be later additions, but as they pieced things together, a pattern started to emerge. The palace had been carefully planned, with decorative stonework showing craftsmanship nobody had noticed before. They even spotted traces of formal gardens and pathways. Breakthrough happened when someone actually looked at both together and realized how the pieces fit. By 2023, they had definitive confirmation of the walls and layout. A previously unknown portrait of Henry VIII popped up online a few years ago. It showed the king in a pose and style similar to famous Tudor paintings, but had been catalogued incorrectly for decades. The painting existed in a private collection, photographed and referenced, but no one realized that it actually was an authentic Tudor-era portrait. For all that time, it was just another image in a database, totally overlooked. But in 2024, an art historian named Adam Buskiewicz restarted comparing it to known portraits, and then everything clicked. The way Henry's outfit was painted, the details on his sleeves, the tilt of his head, these matched other confirmed pieces. The painting was authentic. Based on some of the materials and brushwork, might have been painted by a skilled court artist. And the crazy part is, this portrait wasn't hidden in an attic or buried in some forgotten archive. It was out there, it was online. People could see it if they bothered to look, but someone just stopped assuming it was just another copy and actually examined it properly. Well, with all that said, I've been your host, James, and I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.